little girl inside the house.
How old?
How old is your daughter? 10. Oh, yeah, she's 10.
I think it's beyond anyone's conception that this could happen, especially to a little 10-year-old child.
Involved in the criminal law for over 30 years, and this is the most inhumane case I think I've come across.
We're her voice, and we gotta speak up.
If nobody's gonna do it, we have to do it.
Victoria Martens was just 10 years old, a bright, cheerful little girl who loved gymnastics and the color purple. Her life was filled with curiosity and joy, but in one unimaginable night, everything changed. The story that would unfold left an entire community shattered and searching for answers. This is a case that broke the heart of an entire community and left unanswered questions lingering in its wake. What really happened behind those closed doors? How did a little girl with so much love and innocence become the center of one of the most haunting tragedies in recent memory? To understand the unimaginable, we must go back and piece together the story, one that shocked the nation and revealed the darkest corners of human nature. Stay with us as we dive into the unsettling case of Victoria Martens, a story of betrayal, deception, and the fight for justice. Before we begin, a viewer discretion warning. This documentary will examine neglect and systemic failures in child welfare case. While we present the facts carefully, some details may still be difficult for certain viewers. And if you're new to this channel, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And to all my loyal subscribers, thank you for your continued support and donations. Your engagement and shares means the world and helps us share these important stories. If you find it important to discuss cases like this and give a voice to victims who can no longer speak for themselves, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us keep raising awareness and ensures that no story is forgotten. Now, let's get back to the story. Victoria Martens was born on August 23, 2006 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. From the beginning, her life was marked by challenges, but despite the hardships, she remained a bright, cheerful child with a spirit that seemed unbreakable. Victoria loved gymnastics, swimming, and the color purple. She was known for her infectious smile and playful energy, lighting up every room she entered. Raised by her single mother, Michelle Martens, Victoria's early life was shaped by her mother's struggles. Michelle faced the daunting task of raising 2 children alone after Victoria's father abandoned them at birth. The father's absence left Michelle to balance the demands of parenthood with the relentless pressure of providing for her family. As a result, she often leaned on her parents, John and Pat Martens, who played a significant role in Victoria's upbringing. They were her unwavering support system, and to them, Victoria was their little queen. They cherished every moment they spent with her, nurturing her passion for gymnastics and encouraging her to embrace life with joy. As Victoria grew older, her world remained filled with innocence and wonder. She thrived in school and loved spending time at the park, roller skating, and practicing her gymnastics routines. Her teachers described her as polite, friendly, and full of life, a little girl who cherished the simple joys of childhood. Victoria's grandparents remained a steady presence, always ready to support and protect her whenever they could. For Michelle, being a single mother was not only financially demanding but emotionally exhausting. Balancing work and childcare became a daily challenge, and she often found herself overwhelmed and longing for companionship. In search of support and a sense of stability, Michelle turned to online dating. It was there that she met Jason Ng, a man who seemed to offer the stability she desperately sought. Jason quickly became part of their lives, and to Victoria he represented the father figure she never had. He was kind to her, and for a while it seemed like their small family had found a semblance of normalcy. In 2008, Michelle and Jason welcomed a baby boy named Matthew, Victoria's half-brother. The birth brought a renewed sense of hope for Michelle and her children. Victoria, just a toddler at the time, embraced her new role as a big sister with excitement. She adored Matthew, and their bond became one of the few constants in her life. Together they made memories that would later stand in stark contrast to the nightmare that awaited them. Despite the hope that Jason brought to their lives, the relationship did not last. In the following years, Michelle's romantic life became increasingly tumultuous. She cycled through a series of relationships, each one more fleeting than the last. Desperation for companionship and stability led her back to online dating, a choice that would ultimately change the course of Victoria's life forever. On several occasions between 2015 and 2016, Michelle herself made multiple calls to the New Mexico Children, Youth and Families Department, CYFD, seeking assistance and intervention. In total, CYFD received 5 phone calls regarding the Martens household, many of which were initiated by Michelle in an attempt to ensure safety and well-being. One particularly concerning report came in March 2016, when Michelle expressed fear that one of her boyfriends had acted inappropriately towards Victoria. This alarming call should have prompted an immediate and thorough investigation, yet despite the gravity of the situation, CYFD's response was minimal at best. The agency failed to conduct a comprehensive assessment or follow up with any meaningful intervention, leaving the situation unresolved. These red flags were clear indications that something was amiss, but no concrete action was taken to evaluate the household or ensure that Victoria was in a safe environment. The lack of decisive response from CYFD created a critical gap in support, leaving the family vulnerable despite Michelle's attempts to seek help. It was a significant oversight that would later be recognized as a major failing of the system. In hindsight, it's hard to understand how these warning signs went unaddressed. The absence of follow-up and failure to investigate would later become a focal point of public outcry, with the community demanding accountability from an agency tasked with safeguarding families. Many questioned how such crucial alerts could be overlooked, allowing the situation to continue unchecked. As the years went by, Michelle's life was unraveling. Each failed relationship left her more vulnerable, and she began making reckless decisions that would expose Victoria to unimaginable danger. Online dating became her escape, and with each new connection, she grew more disconnected from reality. What she didn't realize was that one of these fleeting relationships would soon shatter their world completely. In the months leading up to Victoria's passing, Michelle met Fabian Gonzalez through an online dating platform. He presented himself as charming and attentive, quickly integrating himself into their lives. But Fabian was far from the supportive partner Michelle had hoped for. Unbeknownst to her, his criminal past and questionable associations would soon set off a chain of events that would lead to unthinkable consequences. It was during this period that Michelle also welcomed Jessica Kelley into their lives, Gonzalez's cousin and a recent parolee. Jessica had just been released from prison and was looking for a place to stay. Unaware of the danger she was inviting into her home, Michelle allowed Jessica to move in, hoping that having more adults around would make things easier. This decision would mark the beginning of a descent into darkness, one that would ultimately claim Victoria's life. As strangers became fixtures in their home, Victoria remained blissfully unaware of the lurking threat. For her, life was still filled with dreams of gymnastics and family outings, unaware of the danger that was inching closer with each passing day. Victoria's life, though filled with love from her grandparents and moments of innocence and joy, was overshadowed by the choices of the adults around her, choices that would ultimately fail to protect her from the horrors that lay ahead. On the night of August 23, 2016, just one day after Victoria Martens celebrated her 10th birthday, the Albuquerque Police Department received a call that would become one of the most harrowing cases they had ever encountered. Emergency responders rushed to the Martens' apartment on the west side of the city. What they found inside would leave even seasoned detectives shaken to their core. The atmosphere was thick with an overwhelming sense of chaos and disbelief. Officers and paramedics tried to make sense of what they were seeing, their training barely enough to brace them for the horrific reality that had unfolded within those walls. Inside the small apartment, they discovered the remains of Victoria Martens. There were clear signs that something bad had taken place, and the circumstances surrounding her passing were almost incomprehensible. The sheer gravity of what had happened shocked even the most experienced investigators, who later described it as one of the most disturbing scenes they had ever witnessed. As officers secured the area, they quickly identified 3 adults at the scene: Victoria Martens, Fabian Gonzalez, and Jessica Kelley. All 3 appeared visibly distressed, but their explanations and accounts were chaotic and contradictory. Detectives attempted to piece together what had occurred, but their initial statements made little sense. The confusion only deepened as each suspect seemed to shift blame, offering fragmented stories that raised more questions than answers. Michelle, the mother of the victim, appeared strangely detached. Despite the severity of the situation, her statements were inconsistent, filled with unsettling details that didn't seem to align with the evidence. Fabian Gonzalez, Michelle's boyfriend, gave his own conflicting version of events, and Jessica Kelley, his cousin, seemed incoherent, offering little clarity to the unfolding investigation. Word of what happened spread rapidly through the neighborhood. Families gathered on sidewalks, watching in stunned silence as the police worked late into the night, combing the scene for evidence. It wasn't long before news cameras arrived, capturing images of the chaotic aftermath and the sheer magnitude of the police presence. The community was in shock. Victoria Martens was a familiar face to many in the area. A bright little girl who loved to play outside, her laughter echoing through the apartment complex. To imagine that something like this could happen to a child, especially one so full of life and potential, left residents reeling with grief and anger. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Vigils were planned within hours as people struggled to process what had taken place. Messages of condolences poured in from across the city, and makeshift memorials appeared outside the apartment complex. Flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes expressing sorrow and disbelief. The authorities were under immense pressure to find answers. How could something like this happen to a young girl in her own home? Who was responsible, and why did it seem that none of the adults present could provide a coherent account of the events? As detectives continued their work, they knew that unraveling the truth would not be easy. The initial chaos and conflicting statements only complicated their efforts, but one fact remained undeniable. The crime was unimaginably brutal, and the community was demanding justice for Victoria. What had happened within the walls of that small apartment? How had a night meant to be filled with the joy of a young girl's birthday turned into a tragedy that would scar a community forever? The search for answers had only just begun. In the days that followed, the focus shifted from processing the shock to demanding accountability. Community members gathered outside the police station, holding candles and calling for justice. The media covered the story relentlessly, digging into every detail and speculating on how such a heartbreaking event could take place right in the heart of a close-knit community. The police knew they were racing against time. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every forensic result needed to be scrutinized carefully. They couldn't afford to overlook a single detail. As the investigation intensified, the public's demand for answers only grew louder, and the case of Victoria Martens became a nationwide talking point. The investigation began without hesitation. Detectives knew that every moment was crucial in piecing together the truth. As they sifted through the chaotic and confusing initial statements from Victoria Martens, Fabian Gonzalez, and Jessica Kelley, it became clear that nothing about this case would be straightforward. Law enforcement meticulously secured the crime scene, ensuring that every possible piece of evidence was collected. Forensic specialists moved cautiously through the apartment, documenting and analyzing each item. The first critical step was processing the physical evidence, including gathering DNA samples from various areas. Detectives knew that forensic results could hold the key to unlocking the truth amid the conflicting statements. The forensic analysis soon revealed a puzzling discovery. Among the collected DNA samples, one stood out: an unidentified male's DNA. This was both unexpected and alarming, as it did not match any of the three suspects present at the scene: Michelle, Fabian, or Jessica. The presence of a fourth individual raised disturbing questions. Who was this unknown person, and how did his DNA end up there? Authorities urgently cross-checked the DNA against both state and national databases, hoping for a match. Yet, despite exhaustive searches, the identity of this individual remained elusive. Investigators knew they were dealing with more than just conflicting testimonies. There was now an entirely new element to the case that demanded answers. Amid the forensic examination, detectives turned their attention to the three suspects. They needed to break down the statements given by Victoria Martens, Fabian Gonzalez, and Jessica Kelley. In the interrogation room, Michelle's demeanor was perplexing. Her initial confessions were not only inconsistent, but also deeply troubling. She admitted to allowing harm to come to her daughter, but the details seemed almost rehearsed and lacked coherence. As investigators pressed for clarity, Michelle's story continued to shift, raising doubts about the credibility of her statements. Detectives noted that Michelle appeared unusually calm and detached. Her accounts were chaotic, weaving in and out of scenarios that seemed implausible and disconnected from reality. One investigator later commented that Michelle seemed to be saying whatever she thought the police wanted to hear, as if she were crafting a narrative on the spot. It left detectives questioning whether she fully comprehended the gravity of what she was saying, or whether someone had influenced her version of events. Detectives then moved on to questioning Fabian Gonzalez. His attitude was defensive, and he firmly denied any involvement in what had happened to Victoria. Fabian claimed he had been asleep and had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. Yet his story also lacked consistency. Investigators noticed gaps in his timeline and contradictions in his description of the night's events. Despite his assertions of innocence, detectives were not convinced. Jessica Kelley, meanwhile, proved even more challenging to interrogate. Having recently been released from prison, Jessica was visibly agitated and often incoherent. She maintained that an unknown man had entered the apartment and committed the crime while she was incapacitated. Her claim was not only unsupported, but also contradicted by the evidence found at the scene. Detectives quickly identified her account as unreliable, but the chaos of her story only made the investigation more complex. Detectives were determined to cross-reference every statement with tangible evidence. They examined phone records from the night of the crime, looking for any indications of calls or messages that might explain the presence of an unidentified male. What they found did not align with the stories provided by the suspects. Michelle had mentioned allowing people into her home, but records did not support her claims. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras revealed movements around the apartment building, but nothing definitively linked anyone else to the crime. Adding to the complexity were the criminal backgrounds of both Jessica Kelley and Fabian Gonzalez. Jessica had a history of drug charges and had only recently been paroled. Fabian, too, had a record involving criminal behavior, raising suspicions about his influence on Michelle and his potential role in the crime. Yet, despite their criminal pasts, Nothing directly linked either of them to the act itself. The forensic evidence, especially the DNA from an unknown male, remained a troubling mystery. Public reaction to the unfolding investigation was intense and unrelenting. As news of Michelle's confessions spread, people were horrified and outraged. The idea that a mother could be involved in such a situation was incomprehensible to many. The media followed every development closely, and public forums erupted with debates over guilt, blame, and justice. Community members gathered at vigils, demanding answers and holding signs that called for accountability. Despite the pressure from both the community and the media, detectives remained focused on unraveling the truth. As more forensic results came in, they scrutinized every detail, hoping to find something that would break the case open. Yet the conflicting stories, the presence of unidentified DNA, and the complicated personal histories of the suspects made it nearly impossible to pinpoint a clear narrative. Michelle's claims about using substances to incapacitate her daughter were scrutinized carefully. Toxicology reports, however, revealed no substances in Victoria's system. This finding directly contradicted Michelle's initial statements, casting further doubt on her credibility. Detectives began to consider whether her confession was coerced or influenced by others. The public reaction to this new revelation was swift. Many began questioning whether Michelle had been manipulated into giving false statements. Some speculated that pressure from the interrogators might have caused her to fabricate stories, while others pointed to her apparent lack of awareness as a sign of coercion. The lack of physical evidence to support her claims became a focal point of public discourse. As the investigation continued, the growing tension between public perception and the unfolding truth created an atmosphere of intense scrutiny. Detectives knew that solving this case would require more than just confessions. It would take irrefutable evidence and a thorough examination of every lead. With public sentiment growing more intense by the day, investigators faced mounting pressure to provide answers, while the haunting question remained: who did the unknown DNA belong to, and what role did it play in this event? With each new piece of evidence, the investigation seemed to grow more complex rather than clearer. The community's demand for justice grew louder, while detectives worked tirelessly to find the real answers in a case that had already shocked the nation. What seemed certain was that the truth lay buried beneath layers of deceit and confusion, and it would take every effort to uncover the reality behind Victoria's fate. The courtroom proceedings that followed the arrests of Michelle Martens, Fabian Gonzalez, and Jessica Kelley drew intense public attention. As the case moved forward, the community remained on edge, waiting for justice to be served. The pressure on the prosecution was immense, and the weight of public expectation was undeniable. From the very start, the prosecution faced challenges. Michelle Martens had given numerous statements, many of which were inconsistent and contradictory. Detectives had invested countless hours trying to separate fact from fiction, but the confusing nature of her confessions made it difficult to create a coherent narrative. The prosecution knew they had to tread carefully, as the defense would undoubtedly exploit any inconsistencies. Jessica Kelley was the first to take a plea deal. Realizing that the evidence against her was substantial, she chose to admit to tampering with evidence and other related charges. In exchange for her cooperation and a guilty plea, she avoided a more severe sentence. Jessica was sentenced to 50 years in prison. This decision sparked significant outrage within the community, as many felt the punishment did not truly reflect the gravity of her involvement. People demanded stricter consequences, feeling that justice had not been fully served. Fabian Gonzalez was next. He faced charges related to creating a dangerous environment and obstructing evidence. Initially, prosecutors sought harsher penalties, but as evidence became more convoluted, some of the charges were dropped. The prosecution argued that Fabian's actions contributed to an environment where harm could occur, emphasizing his connection to Jessica Kelley and his failure to protect Victoria. Despite his defense team's efforts to minimize his involvement, the court ultimately sentenced him to 37 years in prison. Public reaction to Fabian's sentence was deeply divided. Some believed the punishment was appropriate given the charges, while others felt that dropping the most serious accusations left too many questions unanswered. There was a widespread sense that the full story had not been revealed, and many felt that the justice system had failed to hold everyone accountable. The most controversial outcome came with the sentencing of Victoria Martens. After prolonged negotiations, Michelle accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment resulting in severe consequences, a decision that shocked many who had followed the case from the beginning. As part of the agreement, she was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The community's response was swift and unforgiving. Demonstrations erupted outside the courthouse, and social media was flooded with messages of disbelief and frustration. Many questioned how a mother who had failed to protect her child could receive such a light sentence. Defense attorneys argued that Michelle had been manipulated and coerced, but that reasoning did little to quell the public outrage. The controversy reached new heights when in 2022 it was announced that Fabian Gonzalez was released on his own recognizance ahead of his trial. This development ignited a fresh wave of anger and disbelief, as many saw it as a fundamental failure of the justice system. Community members demanded answers, questioning how someone linked to such a deeply troubling case could be released. Advocacy groups called for stricter policies to prevent similar situations in the future. Legal experts and analysts debated the decisions, acknowledging that the prosecution faced significant challenges due to conflicting confessions and limited direct evidence. Some argued that the plea deals were a practical solution, given the complexity of the case. Others, however, remained steadfast in their belief that true justice had not been achieved. In the aftermath of the sentencing, community leaders and activists organized vigils and rallies to honor Victoria. They called for reforms in child protection protocols and demanded that those in positions of power do more to safeguard vulnerable children. Candlelight vigils continued to mark the anniversary of her passing, reminding the community that her story would not be forgotten. Local lawmakers took notice, proposing new legislation designed to strengthen oversight and accountability in cases involving at-risk children. Community members pushed for policies that would close loopholes and ensure that protective services were more proactive in identifying and addressing signs of danger. The collective grief of the city was channeled into advocacy and reform, determined to prevent future tragedies. For many in Albuquerque, this case became a symbol of systemic failure. It revealed deep flaws in how protective agencies and legal processes handled vulnerable families and children. The public remained vigilant, holding those in power accountable and pushing for changes to prevent such a situation from ever happening again. Victoria's memory is a reminder that every child deserves protection and every life deserves justice. I just want to take a moment to personally thank each and every one of you for watching this video to the end. Your time, support, and engagement truly mean the world to me. This case raises so many important questions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss future investigations. Your support and donations to this channel helps keep this channel going and makes it possible to continue sharing these stories. To my amazing subscribers, your encouragement, donations, and insights drive me to keep uncovering these important cases. This channel exists because of you, and I'm truly grateful to have you here. There are still so many stories waiting to be told, and so many voices that deserve to be heard. I can't wait to share more with you soon, and before you go, I think you'll find the video on the screen right now just as intriguing. Give it a watch. I'm sure you'll absolutely love it. See you in the next video.